I noticed her before she noticed me. That almost always seemed to be the way with her, graceful, deliberate, like the world bent subtly around her, and I was just one small part of the orbit I didn't fully understand. She stood near the window, mid-afternoon sunlight catching the soft gold in her hair, turning it into something I almost didn't want to name. I could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curved around the edge of the table, not quite still but not fidgeting either. There was confidence in the way she held herself, yes, but something quieter, more fragile underneath. Something that made the air between us feel like it could hum if we just leaned closer. I didn't know why my chest felt tight. Maybe it was because she had a way of entering a room without making a sound yet leaving it warmer, or maybe it was just her gaze when she finally caught mine. That look, patient and assessing, like she could see the thoughts I didn't even know I had, made my stomach clench and my hands feel heavier than usual. When she walked closer, our arms brushed. A simple contact, nothing extraordinary, except for the way the warmth traveled up my arm and lingered in the space between us long after she had moved. I wanted to say something, anything, but words faltered at the edges of my tongue, and I watched instead, memorizing the subtle lines of her face, the quiet curve of her lips. "You're staring," she said softly, and the sound of her voice was almost dangerous in the quiet of the room. Low, steady, intimate, as though it belonged to a place only I could reach. I wasn't. I started, but the words stumbled, collapsing into a smile that felt too clumsy for how tense I suddenly was. She tilted her head slightly, a faint crease between her brows, and the faintest edge of a challenge, or maybe curiosity, in her gaze. "Were you?" she asked. Her voice didn't demand an answer, it invited one. Or maybe it invited more than one, but I wasn't sure I was ready to see what that might mean. I caught the scent of her perfume as she leaned over to pick up a book from the table. A soft mix of amber and something green, earthy, strangely familiar, and the subtle movement sent a ripple through the air between us. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, and I wondered if she felt the same pull I did. That strange tension that made my fingers brush the edge of mine's notebook a little longer than necessary. We lingered there, almost suspended, two bodies in a quiet orbit. There was an unspoken rhythm to our distance, a balance of curiosity and restraint, each waiting for the other to make the first move into a space we both knew existed but hadn't named. My heart thudded in uneven beats, and for a moment, I considered that nothing else mattered but this small gravity that pulled me closer to her, even when I was careful not to cross the line she hadn't drawn. And then the moment cracked. The faint sound of a door opening down the hall startled us both, an interruption that made her step back slightly, her fingers grazing mine one last time. That tiny spark of contact lingered in my memory, sudden and electric, as her eyes met mine, searching, testing, waiting. And in that charged, unsaid question between us, I realized nothing about today would be ordinary. I kept stealing glances at her, even when I told myself not to. She had a way of entering my thoughts like a melody I couldn't place, haunting and familiar at once. There were moments when I could swear I had seen this look in her eyes before, something guarded, careful, but also flickering with a hint of daring. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed lightly, watching me arrange papers I didn't even care about. "You're too meticulous," she said, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Her voice brushed against my skin like a feather, unassuming but lingering. "I like order," I said, but I wasn't sure if I meant the papers or her presence. I noticed the way her gaze traveled over me, the subtle way she softened when I looked up, only to stiffen again as if realizing the closeness of her attention. There was something dangerous in the space we were treading, something unspoken. Society, my own hesitation, even the impossible age difference. It hovered between us like a quiet accusation. I wondered about her life before this, what stories were tucked behind her quiet smiles. She carried a kind of elegance that hinted at experiences I couldn't yet fathom, and a solitude that mirrored my own. I knew she had been hurt before. You could see it in the way she touched nothing too quickly, spoke nothing too plainly. And I had been lonely enough, fumbling through connections that never stayed, to recognize that same careful rhythm. Our fingers brushed while she reached for a pen, and I caught the spark before it vanished. I didn't move away. She didn't either. Her shoulder just leaned for a fraction longer against mine than necessary, and the warmth that transferred made my chest tighten. My throat went dry, but I laughed softly to hide it, and she mirrored the sound. Just as soft, just as quiet, but it carried a weight neither of us acknowledged. "You know," she said, leaning closer to slide a sheet across my desk, "sometimes I wonder if people really notice the small things." Her breath brushed my ear, faint but deliberate. I swallowed hard, trying not to betray the surge of awareness, the way my heart jerked at the intimacy of proximity. "I think I do," I said, knowing I meant her more than the sheet of paper. Her eyes flicked up at me, curiosity mingling with caution, and I caught her exhale, the tension easing just enough that the air between us felt electric. We lingered there, 2 quiet breaths, 2 quiet hearts, both daring the other to step closer or to retreat. She let her hand rest briefly on my forearm, not lingering so long as to be improper, but long enough that the pulse of warmth spoke volumes. In that fraction of a moment, I realized how fragile the line was between restraint and surrender, between fear and desire. And in the way she looked at me, not asking, not challenging, just acknowledging what we both already knew, I felt a bond that neither time nor hesitation could erase. A pause, a shared glance, and for one suspended heartbeat, the world fell away. The afternoon had thinned into gold and shadow, and the room felt smaller, warmer, as if it had shrunk around us. I was stacking books absent-mindedly when she appeared behind me, close enough that I could feel the faint heat radiating from her body. "You're too focused," she murmured, and I almost jumped at the sound so near my ear. My pulse spiked, and I realized I hadn't breathed in a moment. She rested a hand lightly on my shoulder, not enough to be scandalous, but enough that the weight of her touch burned against my nerves. I turned, slow, deliberate, and our eyes locked. There was that flicker again, the quiet intensity that made every small motion feel urgent. She leaned just a fraction closer than necessary, and I wanted to close the distance entirely, to let everything unsaid hang in the air between us. But the sound of a message pinging from my phone jerked me backward, and she stepped away as if on cue, a faint laugh masking the electricity we had just shared. Guilt pricked at me. Was I reading too much into a casual gesture? Was it reckless to notice the way her hand had lingered on my arm, the way her breath brushed my cheek? And yet, the thought of stepping away from her entirely felt impossible. We resumed our work, but the space between us felt charged. Every brush of fingers reaching for a pen, every accidental touch while exchanging papers, seemed amplified. I caught her watching me once, eyes narrowing in a way that was both curious and daring. I looked away, heart hammering, but not before the faintest smile curved her lips. A sudden knock at the door made us both jump. I froze. She stiffened beside me. For a moment, the room felt too small, too intimate, exposed. I stepped slightly in front of her, a protective, instinctive motion, and she let me. The interruption passed, nothing more than a neighbor asking a question. But the adrenaline lingered, turning the ordinary air into something taut and electric. She stepped closer under the guise of rearranging a notebook, and our faces nearly brushed. I could feel the soft warmth of her breath as I leaned just enough to read the title. I wanted to tilt my head, to close the last fraction of space between us, to see if she would. But hesitation anchored me in place. The age, the judgment of others, the sheer audacity of feeling this way. Still, we didn't pull apart. We lingered, suspended in the moment where restraint and desire collided. Her hand brushed against mine again, this time lingering almost too long, and I caught the pulse in her fingers, matching my own. There was no confession, no words, just the electric acknowledgement that something dangerous and uncontainable had begun between us. I wanted to close the distance, to taste the hint of warmth on her lips, but we didn't. Instead, we remained like that, closer than ever, but just short of surrender. And somehow, in the silence and heartbeats, that nearness spoke louder than any words could. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick with unspoken words. I had been trying to convince myself that this closeness was harmless. Just a spark of attention, a flicker of connection. But the truth was undeniable. Every glance, every brush of skin, had built a quiet inferno that neither of us could fully contain. She was leaning against the edge of my desk, closer than usual, her hair brushing my shoulder when she shifted. I caught myself inhaling the faint scent of her perfume, warm amber, soft green, spilling into my senses. My fingers twitched as if they had a mind of their own, aching to brush a strand of hair from her face, to feel the warmth of her skin beneath my touch. "You don't have to," I started, words falling short, because I didn't know what I was trying to stop. My chest tightened, and I realized I couldn't even look away. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle, daring challenge in her eyes. "Don't I?" she murmured, voice low, almost a whisper, and it hit me like a physical weight. There was a tension there, desire, yes, but also a kind of fear, a hesitation that mirrored my own. It made my stomach knot, made my hands clench as if restraining themselves from reaching out. I wanted to tell her everything I couldn't. How I noticed her when she didn't look, how I remembered the way she moved, how every small touch lingered longer than it should. But instead, I swallowed, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Her hand found mine almost accidentally, resting lightly on my wrist. I felt the pulse beneath her fingers, and it was like a spark traveling straight to my chest. My heart pounded in short, irregular beats. I could almost hear her breath mingling with mine, feel her presence leaning closer, shifting the gravity of the room toward her. "I shouldn't," she whispered, cutting off herself. The words trembled, vulnerable and bold at once. Her eyes searched mine, seeking, questioning, daring me to break the fragile line we had drawn. And I wanted to, more than I could ever admit. I wanted to bridge that small, electric distance and risk everything in a heartbeat. For a moment, nothing existed but us. The air between us quivered, charged with longing and hesitation, desire and fear. I could feel her shoulder pressing against mine as she shifted slightly, leaning in. My fingers twitched, wanting to touch her hair, to feel the curve of her jaw beneath my hand, to close the fraction of space that remained between our lips. And then she spoke, low and breathless, her words slicing through the tension with a daring finality. "Do you want me to stop?" Her question hung in the air, impossible to answer, a line drawn in the silence between us. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I could feel her waiting, poised on the edge of something irreversible. We were closer than ever, teetering on the precipice, the moment pregnant with everything we'd been holding back. And in that heartbeat, I knew one choice, one single move could change everything. I had just leaned back, savoring the brief silence between us, when her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up, glancing at the screen, and something in her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Her brow furrowed, lips tightening, and she tucked the phone back into her bag with a careful, almost imperceptible motion. "Someone's been asking about me," she said, almost casually, but her voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask who, but the words stuck in my throat. I could see her shoulders stiffen, the faint tremor in her hands as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It was a small gesture, yet charged, intimate in its vulnerability. The air between us thickened, and I realized the safe rhythm we had cultivated was breaking, slipping into dangerous territory. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile equilibrium. "Just someone noticing," she said, her gaze flicking toward me, almost accusing, almost pleading. Not that it matters. But her words were a lie I could feel. Her pulse ran faster beneath the thin fabric of her blouse, her fingers brushing the edge of my notebook, lingering far longer than necessary. I stepped a fraction closer, drawn by the tension, the quiet charge of fear and desire mingling in the small space between us. She didn't move away, not fully, but I could sense the hesitation in the way her body shifted, the tiny shiver that ran down her spine as my elbow brushed hers accidentally, or perhaps deliberately. I started, trying to anchor myself in reason. We need to be careful. She laughed softly, a sound that trembled like glass on the verge of breaking. Careful? She echoed, almost mocking herself. Her eyes met mine, dark and unyielding, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of everything I had been holding back. Desire, fear, admiration, obsession. Her hand brushed mine again, deliberately this time, and the spark that shot through me was both thrilling and terrifying. My fingers twitched, aching to reach out further, to close the space between us, but instinct held me back. She leaned slightly into me, enough that the warmth of her body pressed against mine in a way that made the air feel taut, vibrating with possibility. "Do you think," she began, voice low, almost inaudible, "we could ignore what's outside this room?" Her words, a confession dressed in question form, sent a shiver straight down my spine. I swallowed, my lips dry, heart hammering like a drum in my chest. I knew then that everything we had built, the small touches, the stolen glances, the near confessions, was about to tip over. The space between us had narrowed so completely that retreat seemed impossible. Desire and fear tangled in equal measure, pulling us toward something inevitable, something irreversible. And I realized, as I caught her gaze, that the next choice we made, one move, one surrender, would change everything. The room felt impossibly close, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to witness what was happening between us. I could smell the faint warmth of her skin, the subtle amber of her perfume mixing with the air, and it made my chest tighten in a way I had never expected. She was standing just inches from me, close enough that every subtle movement, a breath, a tilt of the head, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, felt like it belonged to me. My hands itched to brush her hair from her face, to feel the curve of her jaw beneath my fingers, but restraint was impossible to maintain. I wanted to reach, to close the last fraction of distance between us, to see if she would let me. "I don't," she began, her voice catching, fragile but firm at once. She bit her lower lip, hesitation trembling in every syllable. "I don't know if we should. I can't step back," I whispered, almost against my own will. The words tumbled out, raw and honest. My voice was low, vibrating with the force of everything I had held inside for weeks. Desire, fear, admiration, longing. I couldn't measure the risk anymore. I didn't want to. She blinked, a faint tremor in her hands as she raised one to brush against mine, deliberate, slow, a touch that said more than any words could. Her eyes searched mine, daring me to surrender, to meet her halfway in the unspoken promise hanging between us. The silence stretched, electric and heavy. Every heartbeat felt magnified, every exhale charged with possibility. I could feel her warmth pressing against mine, subtle, intimate, and it made me acutely aware of how much I wanted this. The closeness, the acknowledgement, the reckless honesty of desire. "I've tried," she murmured, almost inaudible, "to stay careful, to protect myself. But I can't anymore." Her hand found my wrist fully, fingers curling lightly, anchoring me in a truth we both knew but had been afraid to admit. I didn't answer with words. I didn't need to. The tension in the room was a language of its own, spoken in the brush of skin, the lingering glances, the almost touch that hovered on the precipice of surrender. I leaned slightly closer, letting my forehead brush hers, feeling the heat of her breath mingle with mine. And then, finally, the dam broke. Not with a rush, not with a grand confession, but with quiet clarity. We didn't speak of fear, judgment, or hesitation. We just existed in this shared understanding, raw and unfiltered. All the tension, all the weeks of stolen glances and lingering touches, coalesced into one singular truth. We were here, together, choosing each other despite everything. Her hand rested over mine, our fingers intertwining almost naturally, as if they had been waiting for this connection all along. I breathed her in, the warmth, the subtle tremor, the fragility and strength that had drawn me from the first moment I noticed her. "I understand," I whispered, and I meant it in every sense. Not just her, but myself, the desire, the risk, the impossible beauty of what we had found in each other. She nodded slowly, letting her hand squeeze mine, a quiet agreement that nothing needed to be spoken further. For the first time, it felt like we were fully seen, fully known, and we weren't stepping back. The afternoon light had softened into evening, and the room no longer felt like it was pressing in on us. Instead, it felt like it had stretched to hold everything between us. Every stolen glance, every trembling heartbeat, every word left unsaid until now. We sat close on the couch, knees almost touching. The small space between us no longer electric with anticipation but warm with quiet understanding. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had been searching for each other all along. I could feel the pulse in her wrist, subtle and steady, and it mirrored my own, a rhythm that had finally settled into something calm, something whole. "You really stayed," she murmured, leaning slightly into my shoulder. Her hair brushed against my chest, a soft reminder of the closeness we had fought to reach. Her voice was low, warm, almost hesitant, carrying the weight of everything we had both held back. "I couldn't not," I whispered, tilting my head so that my forehead lightly pressed against hers. The contact was small, intimate, and infinitely satisfying. No grand gestures, no perfect lines, just us, fragile, human, present. We lingered in silence for a moment, breathing each other in, savoring the simple reality of togetherness. There was no judgment here, no societal expectation pressing on us, no lingering fear of what could go wrong. Only the undeniable warmth of connection, the slow, steady beat of mutual understanding. She shifted slightly to look at me, eyes searching, and I realized how much we had both carried before this moment. Fears, doubts, hesitation, and how, somehow, it had all melted away simply by choosing to be present with each other. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, fingers lingering against her cheek, and she closed her eyes, leaning fully into the touch. "You're different than I imagined," she said softly, almost a confession, and it made me smile. "And you're exactly who I needed," I replied, voice low, steady. No dramatics, no promises too big to keep. Just truth, simple and raw. We stayed like that, side by side, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, my arm around her, fingers still entwined. The quiet hum of the evening outside, the faint rustle of pages from the books we had been pretending to organize. It all felt suspended, a gentle backdrop to the intimacy we had finally allowed ourselves to claim. The age gap, the whispers of hesitation, the weeks of tension and near misses. They all faded into insignificance in the face of this quiet, human closeness. We were here now, fully present, fully willing to feel, fully connected. I pressed a soft kiss to her temple, and she sighed, a contented, shivering sound that made the moment feel infinite. No words were needed beyond that, no grand explanations, only the warmth of touch, the reassurance of presence, the quiet certainty of being seen and accepted. And in that simple, messy, human way, we found our resolution. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?